Dads of Reddit. What's your best don't tell mom story? My wife or I will write notes and put them in our 9-year-old son's lunchbox most days. One day my wife's note was found by a boy named Maximum in my son's class and read aloud to his table. Needless to say, my son came home quite embarrassed. Since I'm currently unemployed, I went to have lunch with my son at school the next day. Towards the end of lunch, he points the boy out to me. We have always preached turning the other cheek, telling the teacher, etc. But something about this kid's face made all those teachings fly out of window. I told my son, now listen. I'm going to tell you something you can say to him, but you cannot tell your mother. My son replies that he'll keep our secret, so I give him a pretty mild burn and tell him to use it discreetly. Fast forward to that evening and my wife is signing the daily conduct sheet upon which is written, your son came into the classroom after lunch and yelled to the entire class that Maximum's mother doesn't send him notes because she doesn't love him. He didn't rat me out to the teacher, but I fell on the sword for him at home. You kid is ducking vicious. You've raised him well. Not dad but son. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing hide and seek with my mom and dad. Dad would pick a spot for me to hide and mom would come looking. Dad decided mom would never find me if he opened the window and put me out onto the roof of the balcony, a floor below us 3-story apartment house. I brought my sons, 5 and 10, to Circus in Las Vegas for a weekend. I lost the younger one for a full 5 minutes at one point. Scariest 5 minutes of my life. And mom never heard about it. My parents divorced and my mom remarried when I was about 10. She became a bit of a holy roller. When I say a bit, I mean off the deep end. For context, this was the mid-80s. Suddenly, cartoons were evil. I couldn't watch He-Man, Voltron, Richie Rich, Tom Jerry, nothing. She could see evil in anything. Smurfs taught homosexuality. He-Man taught witchcraft. Richie Rich taught greed, and so on. Magazines were evil too. I was at the age where driving was in sight. So I had various car magazines coming to the house. Not anymore. Why? Because the sexy bikini-laden car models taught hypersexuality, and it would turn me into a rapist. Don't even get me started on video games either. I was only allowed to play religious video games and watch religious cartoons. Also, no TV in my room anymore, because if I was left alone with a TV, I'd end up being influenced into being a gay, murdering, Satan-worshipping warlock. My dad and stepdad hated each other, but looking back, they both looked out for my best interests. They both thought my mother's religious stuff was a bit nuts, too. So, they had some common ground. As a side note, my stepfather must have a special place reserved in heaven for him because he stuck with her through a decade of absolute hardcore religious fanaticism. She's much more reserved now. Anyway, on weekends, I'd see my dad. When I'd get there, he'd have a couple VHS tapes ready for me, all my favorite cartoons. He and I would spend half a day binge watching all that animated evil. And my car magazines were now being delivered to his house. So I got those too. My dad bought me a small TV for my room. It was a 13-inch camping TV. It was about the size of a milk crate. My room had a lot of angles in the walls and ceiling. So I had some good hiding spots. My mom went on a retreat and came back all gung-ho thinking I was on drugs because the evangelist said that any child who wasn't as interested in church as their parents is a child who's being influenced by the devil and most likely is on drugs. My stepdad said he'd search my room for the drugs. She and I stood and watched. He ended up finding the TV, which was in a box in a hidden hole behind my bed. But he didn't tell her. He found my stash of Mad magazines too to her. Those were 100% filth. He didn't tell her about those either. After saying my room was clean, she left. He walked out with a wink. When I came back from school the next day, my stepdad had moved my bed and built me a fort in the hidden hole that had a little entertainment center built into the backside of my headboard. He also added 2 brand new gaming systems. It was cramped, but whenever my mom was off, he and I would gather around my tiny TV in the hidden hole and play video games. Why hide? Because he wasn't allowed to play video games either, and he didn't want to get caught either. Whenever she'd come in, We'd pull the cord on the entertainment center which dumped Legos out and covered the TV and video game consoles. We'd tell her we were playing Legos. She'd ask why we were in the tiny hidey hole and he'd just be like, "Forts are awesome, babe." She thought we were nuts, but we got away with it. Cheers to all the dads who helped us get away with shit. When I was a kid, my dad would mow the lawn and then sneak up to the local dive bar and have a beer before my mom noticed he was done. I grew up in a town of roughly 1,200 people and the bar was 2 blocks away, so it was totally feasible. My dad used to bring me with him, bribe my silence with a 1 bag of Redskin peanuts and a can of Mountain Dew. My mom always knew, because I'd slip up about the peanuts a day or 2 later. Fast forward to being 24. I'd just moved to a new state after grad school with my then boyfriend's job. I was underemployed at the time and my only company was my new kitten. I didn't tell my parents, but I think my dad always knew I was miserable. One day I got a package from home that was 1 pound of Redskin peanuts. He tracked down the vendor from the bar and bought them in a bulk bag. Still warms my heart when I think about it 3 years later. My mum went on a relaxing ladies only holiday with her friends for 2 weeks when my brother and I were 5 and 8 respectively. 2 hours after we waved goodbye to her at the airport, my brother managed to drop an entire drawer on his foot and sever his entire little toe. The doctors weren't sure if they could save it, but they succeeded. By the time mum got home, my brother had a bandage around his toe and as far as he was concerned he'd just had an owie. I don't think she found out until about 10 years later when my brother said, "Hey, remember when I almost lost my toe while mum was on holiday, lol. That was a memorable family dinner to say the least." At 16 my parents helped me get a car. The keys to freedom were: for dad no tickets, pay my own gas and maintenance, and for mom home by curfew. After a few close calls negotiating a few extra minutes with upset mom, dad recommends I call him if I'm cutting it close. Really? From then on, I'd call dad. He'd tell mom that he would wait up, Aka fall asleep in the lazy boy. This was a 2 birds 1 stone deal. He got parenting cred from mom, go on to bed, honey, and a good night's nap in the lazy boy until I drifted home. Miss you, dad. My oldest caught me being the tooth fairy. She agreed that telling mom or her brother might ruin it for them more. She still gets a silver dollar if she loses a tooth. I just don't have to be such a ninja to give it to her. I'm a dad, but this story is about my dad. It was the summer before my last year at college. A friend of mine got a job across country and he decided to take the opportunity to see as much of America as possible before he had to start work. He asked me to come along. It was going to be a month-long road trip. We'd contacted a few friends and relatives along the way where we could crash. The company was paying for gas and 5 nights hotel, and we brought along a tent for the days we didn't have a place to stay. I'd saved up a little money at my summer job. The night before we left, my dad was sitting in his recliner reading the paper as always. I sat there on the couch watching TV. Now, my dad was a very conservative man, old school, the kind of kid should be seen and not heard parent, not big on emotional displays, frugal to a fault. So after everyone else had turned in for the night, it was just me and him. He motioned me over and pulled out an envelope he had hidden, looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Don't tell your mother about this," as he handed me the envelope. It was filled with money. Not a lot by today's standards, but a lot in 1986, and without a doubt more money than I'd ever seen my dad carry. I sat down and said, "I don't know what to say." He responded, "Have fun," and went back to his newspaper. He died 6 months later. That moment was the last real one-on-one interaction I had with my father. A little while after he died, my mom was going through his dresser drawer when she found his stash. Apparently my dad had been squirreling away cash for years, walking around money for when he went on one of his many fishing trips. He dipped into it so that I'd have some walking around money on my trip. You know those noisemaker gunpowder banky things? Explaining to my daughter that you can put them in your hand and headbutt them to make them explode. We went through an entire packet of them that day. One night I was enjoying a small bit of ice cream after my 4-year-old daughter went to bed. She came downstairs and caught me, so I offered her a small bite. But since she was supposed to be in bed, I said don't tell mom. She assured me she wouldn't. My wife wouldn't have cared anyway, but it was a fun little game to play. After she went up to bed, and I was down on the couch, she snuck into the master bedroom, where mom was resting. She told mom that I had let her have some ice cream, and she was afraid of sugar bugs, so could she please brush her teeth again. My wife just laughed at me the next day. Little shit ratted me out to brush her teeth, something she doesn't like doing anyway. Went fishing in questionable conditions. Left the harbor in 6-8 foot waves in a 19 feet boat. Probably shouldn't have gone out at all in retrospect. Had a great day off fishing in the Lever Point. Start to head home, and things had deteriorated big time. Going home in 10-12 feet waves, with big ones hitting 14 feet. Struggling to even make it through them. All this is happening in late November in the North Atlantic. Bad ducking news. If anything goes wrong, no one else is out there to help us. My dad tells me at one point, take your life jacket off. It won't help out here. It will just make the inevitable take longer. We make it home or we don't. I love you. To this day, that's the only time I have been scared on a boat, and I have been in some serious situations. When we made it back, he said never tell your mom what I told you. That is between you and I. So yeah, that's my craziest don't tell mom story. Edit first, thanks for the gold I guess. Second, this happened off Montauk Point in a ripping ebb current going out quickly, so that if anything happened we would be a mile offshore within a few minutes. We were on the VHF with some friends on shore, but the reality of the situation is that no one short of a helicopter will be fast enough to get there. Before you go, hypothermic water was in the mid 50s and air in the mid 40s. And even with a helicopter it would be highly unlikely that we get found in those waves. Last, I'm not gonna stand up for being out there in those conditions. It wasn't smart. But to be fair, we left in very acceptable conditions with a forecast saying the winds would be calming down. For us 6-8 feet are not outlandish at all. And I will go fishing any day of the week in that. And when we went out the breeze was going with the tide, so the waves were much longer. We fished underneath the cliffs at the point all day listening to NOAA still tell us the wind was dying. We didn't know it had picked up until we rounded the point to go home and realized not only had the breeze picked up, but when the tide switched they were not going against each other, so the waves were standing much more vertical. Oh, forgot to add that yes, my dad is a total badass. He has been in conditions much worse than that, and understands the realities of being offshore. He's always taught me that you have to respect the ocean, and once you don't, you're dead. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe,